odds, Astroworld shut down for good this evening. Well, they said it would happen about 6. It took longer because some fans just...
Six Flags is one of the most well-known theme park chains, for better or for worse. They have 20 parks in the US, including the parks with the most coasters on Earth. But believe it or not, this wasn't always the case. There used to be almost double that amount before the chain filed for bankruptcy in 2009. Actually, now that I think about that, there's probably a correlation there. Now, I'm not gonna lie, a lot of these parks were hot garbage, but actually there were a handful of them that were genuinely good parks, and some were even great. So today in this video, we're not gonna dilly-dally, we're just gonna dive right into the 3 best Six Flags parks that were abandoned. So, remember when I said these parks were the best? Well, I kinda lied. The first one was kinda doo-doo, but the reason I want to talk about it is because it's the biggest theme park to ever be built. Bigger than any Disney park, any Universal park, any SeaWorld park. There was never and will never be a park that even approaches the size of this unless you count Animal Kingdom, but that's only that big because of the safari, and even still, this park was bigger. It had record-breaking coasters, animal exhibits, and was all centered around a massive lake. This mystery park was Six Flags World of Adventure, otherwise known as Giagu Lake, and it was only an hour-and-a-half drive from Cedar Point. For those of you that don't know, Cedar Point is the self-proclaimed roller coaster capital of the world, and having been there myself, I will admit that yes, this is a really, really good park. But that's not the park we're talking about. We are talking about the Six Flags park, and unfortunately for us, this mega park no longer exists. All that remains is a big lake and some coaster footers. But before we dive in why that's the case, we need some context. This wasn't originally one park, it was 2. There was a theme park roller coaster side of it that was ran by Funtime Incorporated. This had some smaller coasters and other rides, but nothing too crazy. It was just a medium-sized family park. The other half of the lake was run by SeaWorld. This was pretty much your average SeaWorld park without any of the coasters. Some small rides, but it was mostly about the animals and shows. The 2 parks ran smoothly for a while and were pretty successful as smaller parks. That's the key term. These weren't monster parks competing with Cedar Point an hour away. This was just a fun family day where you could go to SeaWorld in the morning for shows and a fun time park in the afternoon and ride some milder thrills. Six Flags decided it would be a good idea to just take these 2 parks and just mesh them into one mega park. This is stupid for multiple reasons. Now, I'm not a finance guy or real estate agent or whatever, but the idea of taking 2 separate parks and just combining them into one giant entity sounds like a terrible idea, and especially under Six Flags. This was a company that was not super financially stable at the time, so taking in this massive project all at once seems like a recipe for disaster. Six Flags is also by nature a chain focused more on younger crowds, not families. They have bigger roller coasters, which is good for teens and young adults, but kind of leaves younger kids and families out to dry. This means that both of these parks were completely losing their core audience. So Six Flags had to compensate. They decided that they would make sure their new fan base would have stuff to do with the park, and they wanted to build the park up as fast as they could. And when I say as fast as they could, I mean literally as fast as humanly possible. In just 1 year, Six Flags decided to add 20 new rides and 4 new coasters. I'm not even kidding here. It's unbelievable spending. They blew $40 million right out the gate trying to catch this massive park up with all of their other parks. This was during the time that Six Flags was building like 20 new coasters a year, but still like 4 in one park is a lot. And these weren't small either. There was 1 family coaster, so we can cut them some slack there, but like the other 3 were massive investments. An Intimate Impulse, a CCI Woody, a B&M Floorless. These are not small investments. This might work over the course of like, no, it wouldn't work over the course of 5 years. This just wouldn't work. Like, no matter what, this is going to implode on them. And that's exactly what happened. Now, again, I'm not a financial guy, but I feel like if I were Six Flags, I would have spread these out a little more. Maybe do 1 coaster a year and like 5 rides. Like, that's still a lot of investing over a course of 4 years. But this plan doesn't even take into account the fact that after that 4 coaster year, they added another coaster the next year, arguably the biggest one, a Vekoma Flying Dutchman called X-Flight. This non-stop pace of investments also meant that there was no time to build up the surrounding area to the park. No roads, no bridges, no hotels. It was literally just a regular ass town 2 years ago, and now it was home to the world's largest theme park. Like, just like that. That's not how it works. Even in the park, it was a mess. All of the money went to the new rides and operations, but none went towards basic things that make an enjoyable experience, like more pathways, food options, a well-staffed park, basic cleanliness. People would come to the park for the 5 new coasters all built at once, have a terrible experience, and just never come back. And the numbers prove this. They had an initial spike in attendance for 2.7 million when they added the first 4 coasters. Then it dropped a little in 2002, even though X-Flight was added to 2.1 million. Then again to 2 million the next year, and then in 2004, it took a nosedive to 700,000. They are literally losing hundreds of thousands of people every year. But at this point, I don't think Six Flags really cared anymore because they were doing so bad company-wide that they just sold this park to their biggest competitor, Cedar Fair, who also ran Cedar Point, the park that this park was trying to take down.
Congratulations, you played yourself.
The chain was basically down bad. They were $2.3 billion in debt, so they were selling off parks like hotcakes, and that's something we'll get back to later. So what happened to the rides of Geauga Lake? Because spoiler alert, Cedar Fair just kind of closed down this park because it was a hot mess. To be honest, most of them got scrapped. Some of the coasters were saved, but like all of the other flat rides were just thrown in the garbage. The Floorless was relocated to King's Dominion as Dominator, where it still stands today, and X-Flight was moved to Kings Island, where it became Firehawk, which was demolished in 2018 for Orion. I don't know what happened to the wooden coaster, the Impulse, though I suspect the Impulse was relocated somewhere because it's literally made to be moved around, though you can fact check me on that in the comments. But again, keep that bankruptcy thing in mind because it's gonna come back later in the video. It sucks that this was scrapped, but at least they saved the best two rides. Six Flags New Orleans was not originally a Six Flags park. It was a smaller, independent, more family-oriented park centered around the lake. Sound familiar? Park called Jazzland was scooped up by Six Flags in 2002 when the park was almost bankrupt after only 2 years of operation. Now, this should have been a massive red flag. Why would a brand new park be near bankruptcy after only 2 years? Here's the thing. Something about New Orleans and theme parks just don't mix. Like, New Orleans is just kind of cursed. This park was just the latest in the line of many attempted New Orleans parks that had all failed. It wasn't even the first Jazzland. There was another park called Jazzland that had gone bankrupt a couple decades earlier. So why Six Flags thought it'd be a good idea to buy this park, I really could not tell you. But whatever, they did it, and the park is theirs, so they could do whatever they wanted with it. Unlike Geauga Lake though, this park already had a decent foundation. It had a big wooden coaster and some thrilling flat rides. Like, it was pretty much the exact type of park Six Flags would want to buy. They added a new DC land that brought some flat rides and a show, but the headliner for the land, and probably for the whole park at this point, was Batman the Ride. This is your standard Batman clone that can be found at most Six Flags parks now, but it was still a big deal back then when they were first coming out. They also added a Vekoma coaster that ran backwards. I don't know, it looked weird, but the point is Six Flags was adding a ton of new stuff, but this time it was actually working. They spent a lot of money on marketing the new park and rides, and it was actually bringing in guests in pretty big numbers. It was on an upward trend, and it was soon gonna break profit. Things were finally looking up for New Orleans theme park. Unfortunately for Six Flags, they're not allowed to win. Hurricane Katrina came in and absolutely destroyed this park. It was flooded up to 7 feet high for months straight, and 80% of the buildings were destroyed. The only ride that was salvageable was Batman the Ride because it's built higher up and it was relatively new. So that ride was moved to Fiesta, Texas, and the rest of the park was scrapped. It just wasn't worth it to completely rebuild this park when New Orleans was such a gamble with theme parks. This one's a yucky one because Six Flags didn't really do anything wrong here. It's just it didn't work out because Mother Nature didn't want it to. Okay, here's the one you've been waiting for, Astroworld. Out of all three of these, this was the best and most successful. It was beloved by the city of Houston and actually had a really solid collection of coasters. It had rides like the Texas Cyclone, the stand-up Batman the Ride coaster, the Mayan Mindbender, Grease Lightning, and so many more. This again didn't start as a Six Flags park, but it wasn't a small family park either. This was actually a fully fledged theme park, even more so than Jazzland was. It had a ton of coasters and large-scale rides that you couldn't find anywhere else. It was well landscaped, maintained, and had 8 themed lands. This was a legit major park, and when Six Flags came in, they actually made it better. They added a lot of the coasters I mentioned before, and they also added other attractions like the Batcave walkthrough, a well-themed drop tower named Dungeon Drop, and other coasters that I didn't mention, like the Serial Thriller and Texas Tornado. It was running great with a steady attendance and consistently turning a profit. This park kind of got screwed over because it was a pretty self-sustaining park before Six Flags came in. Like, it could handle its own operations. It closed because of larger problems in the chain. I mentioned this when talking about Worlds of Adventure, but Six Flags was in a ton of debt and they needed to sell off some parks. They sold Worlds of Adventure, every single one of the European parks, Elish Gardens, Kentucky Kingdom, and unfortunately, Astroworld. This beloved park was a victim to the massive budget cuts and properties sold in a desperate attempt to scoop up some cash and save them from their crippling debt. And then they still went bankrupt anyways. So in the end, was it worth it? Well, honestly, it probably was. As much as people love this park, Six Flags was also debating closing Magic Mountain. Astroworld seemed to be a top tier Six Flags park, and so was Magic Mountain, so I think they were just looking to close off one of their massive parks in order to save money, and they just happened to choose Astroworld. It sucks, but Magic Mountain has gone on to be undoubtedly their best park and the park with the most coasters in the world. So at the end of the day, I think the sacrifice was ultimately worth it. It still sucks that we lost this top tier park and it didn't really end up doing anything, but hey, at least we got a pretty good album out of it. That's gonna wrap up this video. Thank you so much for watching all the way through. And if you're still here, hit the sub button because clearly you liked it. Again, thank you for watching and I will see you all next time.